Tyne, Dogger, Fisher, German Bite.
In spite of appearances, Stanley disliked being thought of as an idiot, so he fired his signals. It turned out after all that these were never seen. He now began preparations for what he thought would be his final and forlorn struggle with the sea. About a quarter of an hour later, Stan was very close to the first of the breakers. They looked absolutely terrible, and he was appalled. He stood up for one last look round, then, about half a mile to the north, to his amazement and delight, he saw a small ship with a very business-like look about her. Stan thought it was a lifeboat, although he knew for certain it could not have come so soon in answer to his calls. In any case, it was coming from the wrong direction. There is no harbour for many miles to the north of Avid Sand. The little ship bore down towards him, so he put out a long line from forward, so that she could hook it up and hope to tow him clear of the breakers. As she came near, Stan frantically signalled the presence of his line. He was afraid she might foul her propeller in it and be in as perilous a position as his own. Fortunately, his signal was understood, and 3 times her skipper risked everything to get his line. We were now among the first breakers, huge and hideous, and with immense violence they rapidly filled the Potter. Only the sea anchor kept her head to and saved her from being rolled over and smashed to pieces within the first few minutes. The third time round the fishing vessel got the line, but the next breaker threw the Potter back and simply tore the Samson post straight out of her. The skipper of the fishing boat would certainly have lost his ship, his own life and the life of his crew, if he had tried again, so he simply had to leave Stan to his fate. Later, Stan learned that the skipper sent out a radio distress signal on his behalf. This action quite certainly saved his life. Meanwhile, as he got closer to the shore, the intervals between the breakers became less and less, until the whole sea was a vast roaring, boiling mass of white water. Stan was fastened to the boat with his lifeline, but each breaker nearly battered him senseless. Stan never before had to fight so hard to live. After each breaker he found himself, legs one moment, head and arms the next, tangled up in the running rigging. He had to cut himself free time and time again. By the time he and the boat had got to within a few hundred feet of the beach, the sea anchor probably dragged on the ground beneath. He could occasionally feel his feet touch the ground, and he knew he had to break the general golden rule. The boat was not getting into shallow water fast enough to save him, and so he had to cut himself free and make it to shore by himself. Stan could see several men running along the beach now. He cut himself finally free and swam, and was hurled towards them, then dragged back again into deeper water by the powerful undertow. This happened, it seemed, interminably, as in a nightmare. Somehow he was stood up, looking at them, waist deep in seaward swirling water. He expected the next breaker to carry him off his feet at any moment. He looked only to the men on the beach, safe and secure only a few feet from him. If, They could not reach him. Stan certainly could not reach them. His entire energy had been used up. They waded in and Stan collapsed unconscious just as they reached him. Stanley recovered consciousness in hospital 9 or 10 miles away from Havid Sand, where he was given emergency treatment for exhaustion and cold, complete exhaustion and almost fatal cold. In Stan's own words, "I owe my life to those 3 brave men who risked their lives for the sake of a stranger, but they would not have been there to save me if Peder Sorensen, the skipper of the fishing vessel Tyrola, had not had the presence of mind to radio a distress call on my behalf after his own heroic efforts to save me had failed." Unknown to Stanley at the time, the Potter washed in and was hauled clear by other men he did not see. He later found that she survived almost undamaged. A lot of her equipment and his remaining provisions were washed out of her and never found. But what did it matter? He was alive. Stan was taken to the hospital on Saturday and released on Monday, fit and well, but stiff and aching in every muscle, and with a permanent memory of lavish kindness from doctors and staff. A few days later, numerous large areas in various parts of his body turned blue, yellow, green and purple as unsuspected bruises came to the surface. His first day out of hospital was a very busy one indeed. The police and CID detectives escorted him everywhere. They took him to see his poor, beloved little Potter. What a dejected little thing she looked, half filled with white sand, water, and the sodden remains of his gear, all tangled up with frayed ends of rope which he had to slash and cut during the time in the breakers. Stan was delighted, however, to find all the sails intact. The only structural damage, a minor break in the deck, where the Samson post had been torn out of her. In the evening he had to appear at a special court before a magistrate to conform to Danish law by explaining his presence in the country without money or passport. Apparently his excuses were accepted. He was released and told that he had been invited by the skipper of the fishing vessel, who had initiated his rescue, to stay with him as long as Stan needed to do so. Peder Sorensen, who would later become a wonderful friend, during the next few days was unbelievably generous in so many ways. He had visited Stan in hospital and by outward appearances looked as tough and as hard as a man could possibly look. Short and square and with a vice-like grip, he struck Stan as a perfectly adapted man for his job. Peder's house was comfortable, clean and beautifully furnished, but there was no one living there but he and his old father. So they lived roughly as a trio of bachelors should. Most evenings they were invited out for an evening meal by one friend or another, and when they did not go out, they went aboard Tyrola and had many bottles of Tuborg lager to wash down fried eggs. Peder speaking in Danish in a loud, rasping kind of thunder, and Stan in English, till 1 o'clock in the morning, scolding furiously, shaking hands every few minutes or thumping each other on the back. They had a glorious, friendly time of it. At last the boat was ready to sail again. Never one to disdain the advice of local seamen, Stan decided to avoid sailing the last 40 miles along the coast to Tiburon. Peder arranged the necessary road transport to the Fjord so that he could sail the remainder of his journey in comparatively sheltered waters. On Sunday morning he got under way, but had hardly gone more than a mile out across the fjord when thick fog came down, and he had to return to Struer before he lost sight of the leading marks. Monday morning, though grey and hazy, so that Stan could barely make out the shadow of the coast a mile away, commenced with a light southerly wind. He decided to make for Nyköping at least. Before an hour had passed, the fair wind turned southeast and then east again, and he had to motor the whole way. On nearing Nyköping, Stan proudly hoisted his red ensign and his Ocean Cruising Club burgee for the first time on the trip. He felt the little boat had earned this privilege. A number of large car ferries plying their way back and forth from the island of Moors to Salling sounded their sirens in friendly greeting, and their officers waved to him from their high bridges. On reaching Nyköping harbour entrance, Stan decided to seek shelter there for the night. The wind had died and the motor was behaving poorly. Also, it's hardly advisable to negotiate at night the complicated unlighted channels through the narrower parts of the fjord, beyond log store for one's first passage through. The following day came, cheerless as before, very thick grey haze, almost no wind, and his poor ailing motor hardly able to give him 3 knots against the west-going stream. Stan barely saw the islands of Fur and Levo as he passed close by, and it was approaching an early dusk when he passed the town of Kloster. It became clear that the fast current in this part of the fjord would prevent Stan from reaching the harbour at Nibe. Navigation would be impossible after dark, so he headed across the fjord to a place described on the chart as a landing near the village of Haverslev. He couldn't find this landing, so he had to anchor off and try to sleep on board. The cushions were heavy with seawater. He had no blankets. The Primus stove was out of commission, and the fog descended so that visibility became less than 50 feet. Almost freezing water dripped down the rigging. Stan smoked cigarettes because he had not yet found a Danish pipe tobacco which suited his taste. He shivered energetically all night, but did not sleep. By the first faint glimmer of dawn he was under way again, relieved and happy to be on the move. The course between marks, with an average distance of perhaps 3/4 of a mile, had to be set each time by compass because of the dense fog. Stan reached Aalborg with great joy late that afternoon. He learned there from several newfound friends on the following day what the consequences of a mistake in navigation might have meant. A local fisherman had found 2 men that very day, stranded in a small motor cruiser in shallow water 2 miles from the shore along the route Stan had just completed. They had been there without heat, food or bedding for 3 days and nights, and were in very poor shape indeed because of the continuous penetrating cold. And to think he had been bleating loudly to himself all the while about his own misfortunes. He was very kindly treated at Aalborg, particularly by the harbour master, Captain Plowheld, and others Stan would have liked to name. On this account, though Stan now found himself trapped again by the weather, his stay in this fine port was to prove rewarding, if almost unbearably frustrating. The night of his arrival saw the wind increase with determination and stubborn vigour from east-north-east. It brought the first snows of winter, and the temperatures got firmly stuck below zero. The short hop of 76 miles past Halls at the eastern entrance to Fjord and across the Kattegat to Sweden began to look impractical. Strong headwinds, icy conditions, and a tired little outboard motor represented to him the near approach of defeat. Eventually he telephoned his good friend, the Swedish captain, and explained his predicament. That same evening the captain was travelling to Gothenburg to catch the ship to North Denmark to join Stan the following day. And so the adventure continued.